Welcome to Echoes of Africa, where hidden stories, bold voices, and untold truths rise from the heart of the continent. Before you dive in, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because every echo here reveals the Africa they don't want you to see.
Millions of Americans are on the verge of a potential travel nightmare as the longest government shutdown in U.S. history stretched into day 37. Now, unless this standoff ends, the FAA is planning to slash air traffic across the country, cutting thousands of flights per day. That begins tomorrow. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said flight capacity will be reduced by 10% at 40 major airports. It is not clear which airports would be impacted, though we're expecting a list to come out today. Air traffic controllers are working without pay during this shutdown in incredibly stressful jobs, and staffing shortages have already been snarling flights for weeks now. CNN's aviation correspondent Pete Montine is joining us now. I began this show with my own glitch in my head, and I'm not nearly as stressed out as these air traffic controllers. How bad could this get when you're talking about a 10% reduction in workforce over 40 major airports?
We're talking an impact on tens of millions of travelers here who received emails about this from airlines overnight. This is the most direct consequence, Sarah, of the government shutdown on air travel. And airlines were really blindsided by this announcement. I'm told carriers were given less than an hour's notice that the FAA would move to cut flight capacity nationwide by tomorrow morning. Here is the reasoning from the Trump administration. Air traffic controllers are about to get a second $0 paycheck, and Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy says that stress in the national airspace system is making it unsafe. Here's what's happening. If there is no deal to reopen the federal government by Friday, the FAA will cut airline traffic by 10% at 40 of the country's busiest airports. An FAA source tells me the list includes what are known as the Core 30 airports. Those are the 30 busiest, most operationally significant airports in the United States. FAA Administrator Brian Bedford says the cuts are based on pilot safety reports, not input from the controllers these cuts are supposed to protect. And right now, air traffic controllers, rank and file controllers, are telling me there's a lot of confusion about how this will be implemented. In making this announcement, here is what Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said about his rationale.
We're noticing that there's additional pressure that's building in the system. And again, our priority is to make sure that you're safe. And so we're going to talk about additional measures that we are going to take that's going to reduce the risk profile in the national airspace.
You can bet that airlines are reacting to this in a big way. And in a company-wide memo, United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby says these cuts will be significant and significantly disrupt air travel at major hubs, and is warning that passengers should prepare for delays and cancellations starting on Friday. United says it is, quote, actively coordinating schedules and is urging the government to reach a deal immediately. Meanwhile, Frontier Airlines CEO Barry Biffle called the plan unsustainable, saying, quote, you cannot run the national airspace like this. This is not how a modern aviation system functions. He even went as far to say that you should book a backup ticket on a separate airline. That just underscores how unprecedented this move is. The U.S. handles about 45,000 flights on an average day. A 10% cut would mean 4,500 flights removed daily, which is worse than the worst cancellation day of the last year. Every day until the shutdown ends. It's huge. The political reality here is also huge. Never in modern aviation history has U.S. airspace capacity been reduced for the political fight. And the pressure is now on Congress, and the clock is very much ticking toward Friday morning. Sarah?
Yeah, it is very much on Congress, but it is on the administration as well. As people become more and more frustrated, we're looking at pictures. I know you've seen them from Houston, where there are insane lines have been in place for a couple of days now. There is a lot to unpack here, but the biggest thing that you said is travelers need to beware. This is going to have a major...
Africa's rise in global aviation is no longer a prediction. It is a measurable shift unfolding across airports, flight routes, investment flows, and airline strategies. For decades, long-haul aviation was defined by the dominance of North America and Europe. But in the 2020s, a new gravitational center began to emerge, driven by economic expansion, population growth, and powerful geopolitical partnerships. That center is Africa. The change began as a quiet trend. Asian carriers increasing flight frequencies to East, West, and Southern Africa. But by 2024 to 2025, this subtle shift became a global realignment. Major Asian airlines began reducing routes to U.S. airports while expanding aggressively into African markets. The reasons are structural, strategic, and economic, and many of them originated inside the United States. America's strict aviation regulations, rising airport fees, and prolonged labor shortages created an operational environment that made long-haul flights less profitable. At the same time, African markets, once considered secondary, suddenly became the fastest-growing aviation corridors in the world. Asian airlines saw the numbers. Africa's middle-class population surpassed 350 million people. Its business travel sector expanded rapidly, and several African nations modernized airports with runway upgrades, digital systems, and new terminals funded through international partnerships. For Asian carriers, Africa represented a frontier with rising demand and lower operating costs. Multiple airlines cited airport congestion in the U.S., unpredictable delays, and increased fuel costs as reasons for rebalancing their global network. Meanwhile, African destinations offered immediate growth opportunities. Nairobi, Addis Ababa, Lagos, Accra, Kigali, and Johannesburg became hubs capable of handling increased long-haul traffic. Asia's interest was also fueled by trade expansion. Japan, China, South Korea, Singapore, and India increased investment across Africa, which created a natural surge in business travel. African exports to Asia grew dramatically: minerals, agricultural products, textiles, and manufactured goods. With deeper economic ties came new flight routes. Several Asian carriers introduced direct flights to Africa for the first time, bypassing traditional European stopovers. The transformation accelerated when African states began pushing for a unified air transport market under the Single African Air Transport Market. Once fully implemented, this policy framework will allow airlines to operate freely across African borders, similar to the European aviation system. Asian airlines immediately recognized the strategic advantage. One flight into the continent could connect passengers to dozens of African destinations through expanding regional hubs. At the same time, U.S. airports faced a historic decline in operational reliability. Shortages of air traffic controllers and airport personnel led to frequent delays. Airlines operating long-haul flights from Asia reported turnaround times that were nearly double those in African airports. Every hour lost on the ground affects profitability, especially when fuel prices fluctuate. African airports, by comparison, were in a modernization boom. Ethiopia's airport expansion, Kenya's terminal upgrades, Rwanda's new $2 billion Bugesera airport project, and Nigeria's revamped international terminals gave Asian airlines infrastructure capable of handling increased traffic. The contrast became even more visible when the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration issued warnings about operational strain in several American airports, issues that African hubs were actively solving through new technology and partnerships. Another factor was competition. The U.S. Asia airline market has long been crowded, with dozens of airlines battling for the same passengers. Prices dropped, profits narrowed, and carriers searched for new markets with better margins. Africa provided exactly that: less competition, higher demand growth, and strategic access to both Atlantic and Indian Ocean routes. African governments recognized the moment. Countries began offering incentives to foreign carriers, including reduced landing fees, joint venture agreements, and diplomatic backing for route approvals. The African Continental Free Trade Area also accelerated passenger movement and business investment. The continent became one of the most attractive regions for aviation expansion. Meanwhile, the U.S. struggled with strained diplomatic ties with various Asian nations. Visa restrictions, trade tensions, and regulatory disputes made expansion in the U.S. market less appealing. Asian airlines shifted to regions where bilateral relations were stronger: Africa, Southeast Asia, and parts of the Middle East. This geopolitical factor played a significant role in route realignments. Passenger data reflects the shift. Flights connecting Asia to Africa saw double-digit annual growth, while Asia, U.S. traffic stagnated. American airports reported noticeable reductions in certain long-haul categories. Analysts observed that some U.S. airports began anticipating decreased international movement from Asian carriers, prompting discussions about future competitiveness and infrastructure upgrades. Africa's rise in aviation is also connected to cargo. Asian airlines transporting goods increasingly preferred African routes as trade volumes increased. Electronics, machinery, automotive parts, textiles, and agricultural products were moving in both directions. Cargo profitability often determines which passenger routes airlines prioritize, and Africa offered strong returns. The role of African airlines also strengthened this shift. Ethiopian Airlines, Kenya Airways, Rwandair, and others expanded code-sharing agreements with Asian carriers, creating interconnected route networks. Passengers from Tokyo, Seoul, Shanghai, Hong Kong, or New Delhi could reach dozens of African destinations via efficient partnerships. This level of integration was more appealing than the increasingly complicated regulatory environment in the United States. The long-term outlook shows the trend continuing. Africa's aviation market is projected to be one of the fastest growing through 2040, driven by demographics, economic growth, and massive infrastructure spending. Asian carriers are positioning themselves early, ensuring they dominate key African routes before the competition intensifies. Meanwhile, the U.S. is experiencing the opposite trajectory. Declining airline profitability, increasing airport congestion, infrastructure limitations, and rising political tensions with Asian nations all contribute to a less appealing long-haul environment. American airports are still among the busiest in the world, but their attractiveness to foreign airlines is gradually weakening. Africa's emergence as a new aviation center is not accidental. It is the result of strategic investments, growing economic partnerships, policy reforms, and an increasingly skilled aviation workforce. The continent is reshaping global routes, attracting major airlines, and redefining the balance of global air travel. Asian airlines are not merely shifting routes. They are reshaping the geography of global aviation in favor of Africa. The world is watching as Africa becomes a major player in connecting continents, economies, and passengers. This shift signals a future where Africa is not just a destination, but an essential part of global aviation infrastructure. And as Asian airlines reorient their strategies, the United States faces a challenge it didn't anticipate: losing ground to a rising African powerhouse. Africa's aviation future is accelerating, and the global flight path is changing. The skies are opening in a new direction, toward Africa. You've been watching Echoes of Africa, where every story carries the sound of tomorrow. If this moved you, subscribe now, like, and share so Africa's voice never fades into silence.